people are aroused. I haven't seen people so aroused in a very, very long time.
I'm trying to figure out what leverage we actually have. What leverage do we have? They control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. It's their government.
We will win. 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 We won't rest. We won't rest. We won't rest.
Hey, does anyone else wake up every morning with an overwhelming feeling of existential dread? Because that's where I feel like I'm at these days. It's already bad enough that our fascist president is effectively second in command to a Nazi billionaire who's basically the de facto president at this point. But to add insult to injury, their opposition is so feckless and incompetent that it's hard to not just write them off as controlled opposition. Now, with that being said, there are Democrats who have stepped up. AOC, Jasmine Crockett, Ayanna Pressley, Ilhan Omar, Jamie Raskin, Maxwell Frost, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, not to mention Democratic governors like J.B. Pritzker, Tim Walz, and Andy Beshear, among others. But the problem is that the few Democrats who actually are effective communicators aren't in actual positions of leadership. Instead, the faces of the opposition to fascists includes Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, who are useless and, quite frankly, fascist collaborators themselves. And I say that because they've made it clear that they don't want to fight the Republican Party. They'd rather hold hands with them and sing Kumbaya, or we stand with Israel in lieu of Kumbaya.
We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel.
Do you not feel inspired by that? Doesn't it make you feel all warm and fuzzy when the leaders of the Democratic Party lock hands with a Christian nationalist in support of an ethno-nationalist regime doing a genocide? I mean, I personally feel so fucking encouraged to see that kind of unity. It's beautiful, right? But to be clear, the Democratic Party's leaders aren't just morally bankrupt and painfully out of touch. They are also deeply fucking incompetent. Case in point.
The public did not give Trump a mandate to dismantle the whole chunks of the federal government. Gave him a mandate to, kick the tires, check the dipstick, and make sure that things are running well and efficiently. In that part, he has a mandate.
Why the fuck are you saying that Trump has a mandate on national television when he doesn't? This election was not a landslide. He does not have a mandate. He won by a 1.5% vote margin, and yet you think that gives him permission to unilaterally permafuck our government into oblivion? And you're saying that on TV? What is wrong with you? By the way, this is the Democratic Party's guy. They passed up AOC to give this guy the top Democratic position on the House Oversight Committee. He's the face of the resistance among House Democrats, aside from Hakeem Jeffries. They had the choice between a young, popular, and charismatic leader with a massive social media following, and they opted for that guy, a 74-year-old centrist with terminal cancer. But to be fair, his tweets have actually been popping off lately. For example, one of them almost got 60 likes on Twitter, and there were only 15 comments this time exclusively shitting on him. So glass half full, am I right? But I've got another example. So the DNC just voted to replace their old DNC chair, Jamie Harrison, who was promoted to that position, by the way, after losing an election. Great choice. And they had some pretty decent choices, right? Ben Wickler, Fayez Shakir. But instead, they went with the guy who boasted about how the party is definitely still going to take money from billionaires. But don't you worry, they're only going to take money from the good billionaires.
There are a lot of good billionaires out there that have been with Democrats who share our values, and we will take their money, but we're not taking money from those bad billionaires.
Here, thank you, Joe Martin.
That tone-deaf comment right there should have been disqualifying, but he said that, pissed a bunch of people off, and then the DNC thought, let's make that guy the DNC chair. Democrats are incapable of reading the room. We're in an era where you have celebrities like Ethel Cain and Bill Burr publicly saying we should Luigi billionaires to thunderous applause, yet the DNC chair is pretending like there's actually good billionaires when he knows that's an insidious lie. Now, to be clear, I don't want to create a false equivalence by shitting on the Democratic Party, because even though I do believe that both parties are bad, they're not equally bad. They're not even comparable. Democrats are a moderate party, which I don't like because I'm a leftist. But the Republican Party have spiraled into basically what can only be described as a fucking death cult at this point. One is obviously worse than the other. But for nearly a decade, the Democratic Party has tried to coast by simply by not being Republicans. They've convinced themselves that that's good enough. That's all they have to do. Just say, hey, I'm not the Republicans. Look at how bad they are. Aren't we reasonable in comparison? But as this last election taught us, the people just, they want more. They expect more. They deserve more. And the sheer evilness of the Republican Party should, in theory, be viewed as an opportunity for Democrats. They could be the party that's opposed to everything that these fascists stand for. They could give us an alternative vision with a concrete plan to actually make it a reality. They could do a bunch of things, but they're not. They're squandering this opportunity. The party as a whole is just too entrenched in the status quo and too beholden to their corporate donors to enact any sort of meaningful changes, at least internally. And leadership, they just don't want to take the party in a more bold and progressive direction. That's part of the reason why they got to that leadership position in the first place, aside from the fact that they can raise a lot of money, but they're fundamentally incapable of meeting this moment. And we have to acknowledge this if we're going to fucking survive. Somebody on Twitter put it best. They said that we need wartime leaders in this moment, not technocratic managers of the status quo who finger wag at the bad things that Trump is doing. We need a South Korean style opposition party that will put their bodies on the line, climb through windows, scale buildings if they have to, if Doge is going to lock them out of government agencies. We need rabble rousers who will do everything in their power to uproot the status quo. But instead, we got Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer. I'm sorry. We cannot just sit back and accept that this is our fate and accept that these are going to be our leaders during this time. The only chance we have of surviving these next couple of years is to have new Democratic leaders who actually know what the fuck they are doing. And there isn't a single person who believes that Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are up to the task, because they aren't. And that's very obvious. For example, Chuck Schumer signaled his intent to preemptively capitulate to Republicans ahead of a funding showdown to stop a government shutdown. And he made it clear that he's ready to seek a bipartisan solution to keep the government funded. But I mean, this is a major piece of leverage that he just gave away. Republicans control all branches of government, so Americans will blame Republicans if there's a shutdown. Use that to your advantage. Shut down the government if you need to. Shut it down until Trump agrees to stop breaking the law with Elon Musk's Doge. Make them come to you. Don't go to them. They need 60 votes in the Senate. Make them earn those votes. You should be obstructing every single thing that they do. I mean, I don't understand why this isn't something that's just obvious to them, right? Do to Trump what McConnell did to Obama. Don't even let them name a fucking post office. Stop them from doing anything. Learn how to wield the minimal amount of power that you have. Slow down everything. Demand roll call votes. Call for a quorum. Then don't give them a quorum so they can't do shit. Do your best to bring the entire government to a halt. And while you obstruct, also rebuild bridges that you broke, right? Rebuild the trust that you lost with communities, the Arab American and Muslim community, young people, marginalized people, people of color. But that's just not happening. They're not doing that right now. It feels like they're doing shit. Instead, Hakeem Jeffries is actually trying to rebuild the only bridge that matters to him, I guess. As Politico reports, Jeffries met with more than 150 Silicon Valley donors recently to mend their relationship. Quote, there is a significant fear that these tech folks who have been with us for a long time will say, fuck it, we're going with the other guys, said Alex Hoffman, a Democratic donor advisor who works with donors across the country but did not attend the event. These donors are also pissed, watching former and current colleagues have unlimited unchecked power and getting richer off of this, and they're not. Democrats are trying to mend fences, and they're also trying to keep them in the tent, Hoffman added. Yeah, the fact that this is the first group the House Democratic Party leader is reaching out to after the election tells you everything you need to know. And what promises are you making to these rich people behind closed doors, Hakeem? What are you saying to them to keep them in the tent? Are you promising them more power, more deregulation? Are working class people going to get those same commitments? See, this is a problem. And to be clear, even though I'm griping about leadership, it is a systemic issue within the Democratic Party. And I say this because Ruben Gallego, for example, the newly elected senator from Arizona who replaced Kyrsten Sinema, is going to a luxury retreat with crypto billionaire Mark Andreessen. And keep in mind, Gallego is supposed to be regulating this guy, but he's chumming it up with him. And this comes after Gallego joined Republicans to vote for the xenophobic Laken-Riley Act, which denies due process rights to immigrants, including children and dreamers. So if you thought that, we replaced Kyrsten Sinema with somebody good, think again. But this is why, that right there is why the Democratic Party needs new leaders. Leaders who are going to change the status quo and force the rest of the party to stop selling out to wealthy elites. But they refuse to be pried away from the corporate teat that they're suckling on because it's just easier to do it that way than to raise money via grassroots, right? They're trying to be the party of the working class and the party of the good billionaires at the same time, but it doesn't work like that. You have to pick a side, but they won't because they're trying to have it both ways. And that conflict right there is why they're in this spot, why nobody trusts them, right? Because at the end of the day, they can make promises to voters, which they're not even arguably doing at this point, but voters know when push comes to shove, they're going to answer the phone call to a donor and not to them. They're going to do what their donors want and not what they want. But to Democrats, they don't actually feel like they need to change anything. In fact, they think that it's a messaging issue, not a policy issue. And they genuinely believe that so long as they sufficiently get out the message better and more effectively, then everything is going to be copacetic. That solves all of their problems. No systemic issues whatsoever. And because they have this misguided belief, the only change that they've tried to actually make since losing the last election was to just get better at messaging. So what are they doing? I'll show you. So in late January, the New York Times reported that certain Democratic governors had a really tense call with National Democratic Party leadership because they felt like the party just wasn't doing enough to fight Donald Trump, and they felt like they had to shoulder the burden of being the resistance at the state level. And they just wanted national Democrats to do more. Now, Chuck Schumer defended himself, arguing that they were pushing back against Trump, but this supposed pushback was almost exclusively through better messaging. And better is doing a lot of work here, right? So Schumer put Cory Booker in charge of the Democratic Party's social media strategy, and I'm just going to read this paragraph from the New York Times to show you what I mean. Quote, last week, Mr. Booker delivered a PowerPoint presentation to fellow Democrats about how to deliver their message online. In the slides, which were obtained by the New York Times, Mr. Booker offered his colleagues guidance on how often to post on each platform. Instagram, once or twice a day. Facebook, once a day. LinkedIn, 3 to 5 times a week. X, 2 to 5 times a day. TikTok, 1 to 4 times a day. In other words, that's their idea of resistance. You know, since the underlying problem is a messaging one, then all they have to do is make sure that they make more social media posts more effectively. And then voila, you're back in the good graces of the American people. Like, they genuinely do not understand that it's not a messaging problem. I mean, that could use work too, sure, but it's primarily a policy problem. You can't just say that you think Trump's policies are bad because we already know that. That's insufficient. The key is to provide people with solutions to these problems. So that way they're not looking for answers from a demagogue fascist like Donald Trump. And once you present an alternative vision to voters, you then have to fight with everything you have to enact that vision, right? Meaningfully deliver for them. No excuses about the parliamentarian. No bullshit excuses that we never hear from Republicans. They just do what they can to push through whatever the fuck they want to push through. We want you to wield power in the way that the evil people wield power, but they just don't get it. And to demonstrate this, Hakeem Jeffries went on Jon Stewart's podcast, and to describe this interview as painful would be an understatement. Just listen to what Hakeem Jeffries says when Jon Stewart asks him why Democrats don't have their own version of Project 2025.
Where is the Democrats' Project 2025? Is that underway? Where's the infrastructure to do that? And who are the leaders taking charge of that effort? Because when I listened to, I believe his name is Ken Martin, is that correct? The new DNC chair?
That's right.
He kept saying it's a messaging issue, as though, no, everything's going right, you just don't realize it yet. As opposed to, we've gotten away from New Deal values. Does that make sense to you?
Well, I think there's a few things going on here.
Yeah.
In terms of how we better communicate with the American people, Maya Angelou said it best. People won't remember what you say. They may not even remember what you do, but they will always remember how you make them feel. And I think what we have to do a better job of is making the American people feel that we understand the pain that they've been in economically.
First of all, this guy has no riz whatsoever. Second of all, we don't need to feel listened to, Hakeem. We need to feel our material conditions drastically improve. I mean, why even bother to listen to us if it's just going to go in one ear and out the other? And I'm sorry, don't give me this bullshit that you're listening to voters, because over the last year or so, voters have been begging you to stop supporting the genocide in Gaza. And what has the party collectively told us? To get fucked. So you're not even good at that too. Now, sure, you might have listened to your constituents at town halls. They chewed you out. But, it's not going to mean anything if the listening doesn't translate into action. But he doesn't get it. And even though he goes on to cite issues that Americans face, like the cost of living and inflation, which indicates that he's listening to us, he only responds to that by saying we have to do something about it, while not explaining what the something is. There's no specificity here. And as you're going to see, Jon Stewart is going to try to gently guide him to the right direction by hinting that it's a policy problem, not a messaging problem. But Hakeem does not take the hint.
If I'm living in an area of entrenched economic pain, right? And I've got a party saying, we've got to understand what you're going through and we've got to do something. At a certain point, those are just platitudes. You've got Trump out there going, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to deport these people, trans people. They're the ones that are causing your problem. These people are going. Everything is specific and pointed and planned, right? Where is that? Like what's the playbook?
So politically, I think one of the reasons why we've seen the pendulum swing back and forth, it went from George H.W. Bush to Bill Clinton to George W. Bush to Barack Obama to Donald Trump to Joe Biden back to Donald Trump. And
you're getting me dizzy.
It's a dizzying swing of the pendulum with very different people who have very different ideologies. What's consistent? The American people have a constant desire for change. Why? Because no one has solved the fundamental problem.
That's interesting.
Now, here's the thing about Democrats. Under Barack Obama, we did deal with the healthcare affordability crisis. The Affordable Care Act has been transformational. We were doing the work. Perhaps we were not speaking as forcefully as necessary to say, you know what? We understand.
It's amazing how he came so close, but then he crashed and burned at the last second. It's true that the pendulum does swing back and forth between Democrats and Republicans, but the reason why that's happening is because neither party is enacting the transformational change necessary to actually improve material conditions. But he thinks that the Democratic Party did. He actually thinks they delivered, and they're just not good at telling the voters the transformational changes that they made. And the example that he uses is the Affordable Care Act. Really? If that were true, wouldn't the pendulum have not swung back to Donald Trump after Obama's second term? Wouldn't Hillary Clinton have won? So good job proving my point for me. But the ACA, I'll admit, is an improvement, yes. But it's still a neoliberal healthcare plan originally devised by the Heritage Foundation, which is the organization that wrote Project 2025. I think we can do better than that. I think you know what the base wants, Hakeem. We want Medicare for all. But he can't commit to that because the party's health industry donors would abandon them if he did. And this comes back to this conflict within the Democratic Party's tent. They want to be the party for Americans who want healthcare to be a right, but they also want to be the party of the health insurance CEOs. They want to present themselves as business friendly, right? And the problem is that the tent has become so big that it's now ideologically incoherent. If the party is big enough to include progressives and Republicans like Liz Cheney and poor people and rich people, that party is not long for this world. The structure of the party is collapsing in on itself. You have to pick a fucking side. But they kind of did, right? And it wasn't us. Now, that interview, believe it or not, got worse. And Jon Stewart is going to acknowledge the benefits of the ACA while trying to get Hakeem to see that it's obviously inadequate. But watch how he responds to that.
It has gotten, I don't know how many millions of people health insurance. But the way that it's done it is sort of a Republicanized, almost like a privatization. It's kind of, if you will, a subsidy to the insurance companies. A promise that look, if you take people with pre-existing conditions, we'll give you from the government $500 a month to subsidize these plans that we will have access to. But we're not going to fix what's at the heart of our healthcare system. Are the Democrats not thinking big enough to change the relationship between, this whole idea of having to fight to lower insulin costs, as though that's like, oh, we got 10 drugs that we can now negotiate with. Like, don't they have to be clearer, stronger, and change that relationship to get government to deliver these services directly and effectively?
Well, I think the Affordable Care Act, it's been an interesting journey, and
I like that phrase.
No, a very important one.
Yes.
In terms of what has happened transformationally, you're talking about more than 100 million Americans with pre-existing healthcare conditions who now have coverage because of the Affordable Care Act. When that battle was being waged, and I wasn't in Congress at the time,
right,
it was still unclear, John, in America, whether healthcare was a right or a privilege. That was an open question. It's no longer an open question. We at least understand that access to high quality, affordable healthcare is a right.
My point is, are they too comfortable within a system that seems not to be delivering? And do we need to take an approach that is more clear and direct to say to people, like, if healthcare is a right, I'm not sure that the ACA is the most efficient way of delivering that right?
I think it's a fair question, certainly, that you're asking. But, the way that healthcare has developed in the United States of America has been a far too cumbersome and complicated system. And what we've seen is a series of steps that have been taken to try to make it as equitable as possible. You've got Medicare and then Medicaid.
Now, he goes on to gish gallop about the history of incremental healthcare reform while never addressing the elephant in the room, Medicare for all. And I had to cut out a lot from that because there's so much fluff that the clip would literally be like 6 minutes long if I didn't try to cut it where possible. And if you watch the full thing, I swear to God, it's so insufferable. It feels like I'm listening to Hakeem Jeffries go over a PowerPoint plan where he's like, here's our 4-point plan, here's our 3-point plan, here's our saying. It's an acronym. It's insufferable. I don't think he understands that we don't want to listen to this. We want to hear from a human, not a robot. Now, I'm not sure if you noticed what he did there, but he said before the ACA, it was debatable about whether or not healthcare was a right. But then he switches it. And he says, now they've established that access to healthcare, that is indeed a right. But Hakeem, we just saw what you did. You are a fucking weasel. You did a switcheroo, and you didn't think that we would notice. See, there's a difference between the right to healthcare and the right to access to healthcare. You added access when we didn't want that. Like, you misconstrued what we said, you hijacked our messaging, and you inserted access in there, and you're now pretending like you've delivered on the thing that we asked you for when you didn't. You know you didn't. And therein lies the problem. They don't want to give the base what it wants because they've made the decision to prioritize donors over the voters. It's that simple, right? And he thinks that the doublespeak and the platitudes is going to suffice, that we'll just take it and eat it up. But he doesn't realize that that's not going to be sufficient any longer. People are fucking pissed off, and they're not taking those talking points. To show you what I mean, just take a look at the comment section under that video. Usually Jon's podcast episodes give me food for thought. This time it helped lull me into an afternoon power nap. My God, this can't be the future of Democratic leadership. Jeffries is the embodiment of everything wrong with this party. Under Obama, we did deal with the healthcare affordability issue. No, you dealt with insurance coverage issues. Healthcare is still unaffordable and run by insurance. We need single-payer healthcare. Bernie interview, amazing. AOC interview, inspiring. This interview, painful. Establishment Dems clearly don't have a plan. Stewart gave him a billion chances to say single-payer health insurance, and Jeffries just couldn't do it. Pathetic. This was frightening. We have no serious opposition. I wasn't expecting much, but I was expecting something. I can't. This guy and Schumer are the two Democratic leaders in Congress. They have the charisma and drive of a wet mop. We need fighters, and we need them now, like AOC and Crockett. Less BS talking, more action. I don't think I've ever stopped one of these podcast episodes early, but I couldn't get through this one. I want to scream. Where's our Project 2025? Anyone, please? We've tried nothing, and we're all out of ideas, the Democratic Party. Is Jeffries capable of having a substantive conversation without sounding like he's ticking off talking points from his checklist? The future of the party, indeed. No, Hakeem, it is not about telling Americans you understand how they feel. It is about solving problems. Americans don't want you to keep telling us you understand. They want you to fix shit. And every time you all get power to fix shit, you don't. That is the problem. And I kid you not, Every single comment that I saw was against Jeffries. These are liberal viewers of Jon Stewart's podcast. They are not Republicans. They just want a party that is going to fight for them. And what we saw was not any assurance whatsoever that Hakeem Jeffries is going to do just that. And this is part of the reason why the Democratic Party lost. It's not so much that Trump and the Republicans won, but I think it's because the Democratic Party, they lost. They just didn't turn out enough of their base. They failed to listen to and mobilize their base. I mean, in the last month of Kamala's campaign, she spent that time courting Republicans as opposed to progressives who were weary about her Gaza policy. And it's just so frustrating because the Democratic Party's base is fired up and angry, and that's a good thing, right? The Democratic Party should use this, but they're doing nothing to harness that energy. In fact, they're actually mad that their constituents have the audacity to call their offices and ask them to do their jobs. I'm not making this up. Axios reports, quote, members of the Steering and Policy Committee with House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries in the room on Monday complained activist groups like Move On and Indivisible have facilitated thousands of phone calls to members' offices. People are pissed, a senior House Democrat who was at the meeting said, of lawmakers' reaction to the calls. The Democrat said Jeffries himself is very frustrated at the groups who are trying to stir up a more confrontational opposition to Trump. Wow. There were a lot of people who were like, we've got to stop the groups from doing this. People are concerned that they're saying we're not doing enough, but we're not in the majority, said one member. Some Democrats see the callers as barking up the wrong tree given their limited power as the minority party in Congress. It's been a constant theme of us saying, please call the Republicans, said Representative Don Beyer. They're calling their representative, dumbass. Quote, I reject and resent the implication that congressional Democrats are simply standing by passively, said Representative Richie Torres. Unbelievable. Now, to be clear, these progressive organizations that they're pissed off with, Move On, Indivisible, they're telling people that these are specific things that your elected representatives can do to obstruct Donald Trump. And they've told people that they can call their elected officials and recommend that they do these things if they don't think they're fighting hard enough. And after getting thousands of calls from Democrats, the response isn't, wow, it seems like people are really pissed off. Let's use this to our advantage and channel their anger. Instead, the response has been, how dare you insinuate that we're not doing enough? The hubris, it's just unbelievable. Now, when it comes to Richie Torres in particular, he's not just sitting on his ass. He's been collaborating with fascists in Israel for more than a year and antagonizing his own constituents who are begging him to stop supporting a genocide. I mean, this man represents the poorest district in the country, but he spends all of his time representing Israel. And on the subject of fascist collaborators, I'd be remiss to not let you know that Congressman Ro Khanna is trying to position himself currently to be the progressive successor to Bernie Sanders in a future presidential run. But this man cannot be trusted, okay? And I say this as somebody who's spoken to him personally, who acknowledges that he has graciously offered to come on the show after I've criticized him, and I give him credit for that. But the problem is that over time, the fuck-ups add up, and they become blinding, where you can't see anything but the fuck-ups. So he missed a vote to subpoena Musk, and then he gave the excuse that he didn't know. Okay, fine. Now, that's suspicious still, but what makes it worse is the fact that if you look up the Friends of Doge, Ro Khanna is one of just a couple of Democrats listed as a friend of Doge. So I'm sorry, Ro, it looks like you're a collaborator and not a resistor. That's what it looks like. You could prove me wrong. Now, Jared Moskowitz was on there too. He's been criticizing Doge on TV, but yet he's a friend of Doge, according to Doge. So there's a lot of snakes in the Democratic Party, and I think we need to be mindful of the fact that even if a Democrat says the right thing and claims to be an ally to progressives, it's not unreasonable to have a healthy dose of skepticism. It's not unreasonable. You're not purity testing if you look at the actions and you say, hey, this isn't really lining up with what you say. With that being said, the main problem is leadership at the end of the day, because they set the standard that everybody else follows. And Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, they've made it clear that it's okay to prioritize corporate donors over your own constituents. They've made it clear that there's no penalty for members who basically become turncoats and vote with the Republican most of the time. They haven't done anything to light a spark under the asses of other members of Congress to get them to actually do what their constituents want and fight Donald Trump. There is a leadership vacuum in the Democratic Party, and the people who actually want to fight, the younger, more progressive members of Congress, they need to be elevated to leadership, okay? Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, they have to step down. So, even though they're fed up with our calls, call your representative, okay? Politely ask them to oust Democratic Party leadership, because it's not a matter of them being pure enough for us. It's a matter of them not being able to meet this moment. It's a matter of survival as far as I'm concerned. And we are not going to survive Trump's presidency if those assholes are in power still, if they're the face of the resistance.
You know the thing. You're getting nervous, man.